Hi everyone, this is Coffeeyay. I'm a coach for HUSNG.com, the leader in heads up sit and go strategy material. Today I'm talking about how to use this program ICMIZER for your heads up sit and go needs. So the first things to do are to set it up correctly for heads up sit and goes. You're going to want the output to be chip EV, CEV. You're going to want to set up your blinds to be something that you want to use. 1020 is pretty standard, but depending on your blind level. You want to set it up to 2 players, and then you just want to set up starting stacks to whatever you want them to be. Now, the two main uses right now for ICMIZER when dealing with heads-up play are to do open shoving math and 3-bet shoving math. So let me show you how it does this. For open shoving math, you set up hero being in small blind and having hero push. And then you set up villain's calling range. So for instance, a fairly reasonable calling range to expect early in a heads up sit and go, something like ace 7 suited, maybe ace 5 suited, and we can include a few wide-ish hands. Queen, king 10 suited, queen jack suited, queen, queen off. I think this is a fairly reasonable range, and basically every pocket pair. I'm going to remove 2s. Once we select this calling range, we go ahead and click Calculate. And what we'll find is we have expectations for all the hands to open shove. The way this is set up is that it's comparing the decision between folding and open shoving. And so this will tell you which hands are profitable to open shove compared to folding given villain's calling range. All the hands in green are the hands that are profitable. If you're interested in maybe a more complicated decision, like deciding between min raising and open shoving, this isn't as easy to do. However, one way you can try to approximate it is by giving yourself a minimum EV difference. Minimum EV difference just means that you want at least 10 chips better than break even, so 10 chips better than open folding. And that's half a small blind, and then that'll show you all the hands that are at least 10 chips better than open folding. You can obviously also type in a number like 5 and have it do the math for you too. And it'll give you all of those. So that's how to do open shoving. Another thing that you can actually do to make life even easier is you can assign Nash ranges. So what assigning Nash ranges will do is it assigns villain the Nash calling range for your stack size. That would be this. And then you can calculate again which hands are open shoves. So you can see I was actually pretty close to the Nash calling range as is. That's why it didn't make much difference. It only added a few suited aces and a few other suited hands and took out 3s. Obviously this also works at shorter stack depths. Let's say the stacks have gotten shorter and we're 200 big blinds deep and big blind has 800 of the chips. Now we're 10 big blinds deep. We can again calculate the open shove equity given that same calling range. And now we see that we have much more equity with all our range. But again, if we assign Nash calling ranges, that's 38% we can calculate. And this will actually give us the Nash open shoving range, as well as all the equities involved. Just wait a few seconds. There we go. And so we can see all the hands that are Nash to shove. In this case, you can even see all the hands that are slightly better than Nash, or have at least 5 chips more than open folding. If we're still considering perhaps min-raise folding, we can consider min-raise folding some of the other hands and shoving just the hands that have at least 5 chips. ICMIZER gives you a lot of flexibility when dealing with things like this. We can also look over at some of the other tools. The range chart shows you how your push range can vary with villain's calling range. The yellow is 0 EV, so this is the push range that we can use that's better than open folding. And the other ones are for slightly different situations, for if we want at least 2 chips better than open folding, or at least 5 chips better than open folding. And we can see just how our push range would change with respect to villain's calling range. there's also a hand EV chart. This, if we select a specific hand, in this case we have aces selected, we can select that back from the results section, we'll see how opponent's calling range will change, how our EV will change given opponent's calling range. So with aces we can see the wider villain calls, the more equity we have. But with a different hand, like 8-7 off, we can calculate that again and see that our hand EV chart is very different. There's a certain break-even point, and then we want villain to call with a tighter range than that. Although we can also see that at a certain point, we actually start losing equity as villain calls wider as well. Or we start gaining equity back as villain calls wider. So these are the kind of things that you can do with ICMIZER with open shoving. The next major feature to talk about is 3-bet shoving. The way to activate this is we switch over to the big blind mode. We again can set up stacks, so we can again set up full stacks at the hyper turbos, 500, 500. And we set up the situation where our villain opens a certain amount. Let's say he min raises, and then we go ahead and go all in. So the things we have to now adjust are first, what is he opening with? So let's say we're playing against a very aggressive opponent who's opening a very wide range of about 85%. This is a fairly standard range among very aggressive players. Probably we can adjust it a little bit. One thing to notice, when we set a certain percent range, ICMIZER will do this percent according to our selected hand ranking. So right now we're on the Skolansky-Chubukov hand ranking. We can also talk about power push rankings, which are a little bit different. And actually I think that this is probably a more accurate representation of villains' ranges, but it's similar, or a power call range. The strength of these different ranges is also for calculating open shoves, call open shoves, and calling 3-bet shoves. In this case, I think likely we can just use the Skolansky-Chubukov rankings and just adjust them by hand. We can just add in all suited hands and remove some of the offsuit stuff, leaving ourselves with a range of about 82%. Just a quick note at this point, just about these rankings again. There's actually a way to put in your own custom ranking as well. I think that's another really good feature of this program, is that if you're really interested in having a really good hand ranking, you can actually do one yourself. But again, for now we can just fix it to this 82% and work with that. Once we have our aggressive regulars opening range, we can talk about our pushing range. And instead of talking about the pushing range, what we talk about is the calling range that villain will call or push with, because ICMIZER will tell us what hands that we can push. And so here we just select the hands that we think villain will call and open shove with. A fairly standard range is something like ace-8 off, ace-7 suited plus, and king-queen off, and maybe king-jacks, and all the pocket pairs. Likely, actually, villain isn't opening with some of the bottom pocket pairs, he's open shoving them. But for this demonstration, let's have him bet call. After we do this, we just click calculate again, and ICMIZER will again calculate all of the 3-bet shove expectations compared to folding. We can again do the same thing. First of all, it's funny to notice that actually every hand right now is better 3-bet shoved than folded. And this is just because villain is opening so wide but calling so tight. But we can also talk about, again, expectations, differences of expectations. If we want to compare it maybe to flatting or 3-betting not all in, we can change the equity bubble and see how profitable we want to be with certain hands. So a good one to use is, for instance, 20 chips. That'll make us break even from start of hand. And we can see that these kind of hands will be break even from start of hand, 3-bet shove, versus this specific villain. Unfortunately, we cannot assign Nash ranges because there are no Nash ranges for 3-bet shoving. We can again look at some of the same math with the range chart and the hand EV chart. It'll display the same information as for open shoving. Lastly, it can be very useful, especially to now use some of these different rankings and use the power call, for instance, for villain's calling range. If we know that villain, for instance, calls something like 30% of hands at shorter stacks, we can adjust to maybe stacks of about, again, 10 big blinds deep. We can actually just set them both to 200 and it'll still be 10 big blinds deep. We again just have to rewrite this and have it raised to 40, shove all in. We have a calling range of 30%, and we have a raising range of, probably a little bit tighter since we're shorter stack. We can talk about 68% maybe. We can again calculate these shorter stacks and get another sense of how things go. It looks like again we're pretty profitable shoving, despite a wide calling range, just because villain is raising so many hands, and we're so short stacked. A lot of these hands will still be better to be shoved than folded. And this is really the power of ICMIZER. It calculates all the different hands and lets you do strategies based on this. It'll always compute what's better than folding to a bet, and so it lets you get really good, accurate assessments of how to play versus villain's range, at least in terms of the 3-bet shove or fold decision making. I'll be talking more about the specific uses and how to use it more strategically in my Math and Heads Up Sit and Go series. I'll be talking about how to craft some strategies using it and how it can be really used very well at all different stack depths. But for now, I think that this is enough information and gives you a good sense of how to use this tool and what it can be used for in heads-up play.